Battle for the Donbas, Russia beats back Ukrainian counterattacks in Severodonetsk with heavy artillery, as Ukraine Armed Forces chief admits they are facing catastrophic lack of momentum swung back in favor of Russia last night as Putin's forces retook most of the city Severodonetsk. Ukrainian forces are still managing to hold their positions on the outskirts of the city, defense officials said. But Putin's forces are seizing ground metre by metre, advancing slowly behind heavy artillery bombardment. Ukraine's armed forces are running low on artillery ammo and implored West to send more heavy weapons. And Belarus has raised alarm bells amid decisions to reinforce its army along the border with Ukraine. Elsewhere, Britain's MOD warned that Mariupol may suffer a cholera outbreak amid horrendous conditions. Much of the Russian-occupied territories in south have limited access to drinking water, medicine and power. Momentum in the battle for the Donbas swung back in favor of Russia last night after Putin's forces managed to retake most of Severodonetsk in the Luhansk region. Ukrainian forces are still managing to hold their positions on the outskirts of the city, officials said, but are subject to almost round-the-clock bombardments as Russian troops employ a World War I-style approach of seizing ground metre by metre behind heavy artillery. The industrial hub, along with its smaller twin Lysychansk on the opposite bank of the Severodonetsk River, represents the last Ukrainian-controlled part of Luhansk province, which Russia is determined to seize as one of its principal war objectives. As such, the two urban centers have endured bitter fighting in recent weeks as Ukraine's armed forces attempt to hold off an all-out Russian offensive. Ukraine's Security Council Secretary Alexei Danilov said on Thursday the situation in Severodonetsk was extremely complicated and Russian forces were focusing all of their might in the air. The Russian army don't spare their people, they're just sending men like cannon fodder. They are shelling our military day and night, Danilov said, while Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokesperson Oleksandr Motuzian declared, Russia's strategic goal is the complete destruction of. They want to destroy Ukrainian statehood and install a government it can control here. Russia shelled more than 20 towns in Donetsk and Luhansk on Thursday, destroying or damaging 49 homes, several manufacturing plants, farm buildings and a rail station. 2 civilians were killed, according to officials. Russia says it does not target civilians. Meanwhile, commander of Ukraine's Svoboda National Guard Battalion Petro Kusyk said his men were drawing the Russians into street fighting in Severodonetsk to neutralize their artillery advantage. Yesterday was successful for us. We launched a counteroffensive and in some areas we managed to push them back 1 or 2 blocks. In others they pushed us back, but just by a building or 2, he said in a televised interview. But Kusyk admitted his forces were suffering from a catastrophic lack of counter-battery artillery to fire back at Russia's guns, and said that getting such weapons would transform the battle. Ukraine's deputy head of military intelligence Vadim Skibitsky echoed Kusyk's statement and warned that Ukrainians' armed forces are running low on munitions for the artillery pieces they already have. He told The Guardian that Western allies must deliver more artillery and long-range missiles to keep Ukraine in the fight. Everything now depends on what the West gives us. Ukraine has 1 artillery piece to 10 to 15 Russian artillery pieces. We have almost used up all of our ammunition and are now using 155 caliber NATO standard shell. Ukraine is expected to provide a list of weapons and defensive equipment it requires at a meeting with NATO in Brussels on June 15, following U.S. President Joe Biden's promise of advanced rocket systems and additional munitions. Germany also said it would offer its most advanced air defense systems to help protect Ukrainian skies. And UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been vocal in her support to help arm Ukraine in depth. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday evening said his troops had made minor gains in the southern Kherson and Zaporizhia regions where Russia is trying to impose its rule on several occupied territories. Ukraine's defense ministry confirmed it had launched a series of counterattacks, capturing new ground in a move Zelensky said succeeded in disrupting the occupiers' plans, but Kherson's administrative center is still under complete Russian control. Russian proxy governments installed in Kherson city and a series of smaller towns have in recent weeks introduced the Russian ruble as official currency and begun broadcasting Russian state media television channels while preparing a referendum to formally join the Russian. But logistical disruption in Ukraine's south following months of constant fighting, shelling and the introduction of pro-Russian administrators have seen conditions in the occupied territories deteriorate drastically. An intelligence update provided by Britain's Ministry of Defence this morning said Russia is struggling to provide access to safe drinking water in areas under its control and warned of a critical shortage of medicine. And in the decimated port city of Mariupol, there are fears the already battered and deprived civilian population could soon suffer an outbreak of cholera. There have been several reports of isolated cases of the bacterial disease since May, but the total collapse of medical support in the bombed-out metropolis, along with very limited access to drinking water and power, means conditions are ripe for the disease to spread. Natalia Gumenyuk, a spokesperson for Ukrainian forces in southern Ukraine, said Russia had 40 cruise missiles targeting Ukraine from the sea, suggesting Ukrainian units attempting to regain territory in Zaporizhia and Kherson could soon face a fresh round of bombardment, though she did not say how Ukraine obtained the information. Belarus also raised alarm bells this week when President Alexander Lukashenko and his advisors said the country's military presence along the Ukrainian border would be reinforced and announced a series of new military mobilization exercises, moves eerily reminiscent of the buildup of Putin's troops in western Russia in the weeks prior to the invasion on February 24. U.S. think tank The Atlantic Council warned Belarus military scale-up represented an transition from peacetime to wartime and boosted speculation over a renewed cross-border offensive. If Belarusian forces were to join the conflict and invade from the north, Ukraine's army would be forced to regroup and deploy across two fronts, stretching its defenses dangerously. The British government this morning declared Russia must take responsibility for the sham trial of two Britons who have been sentenced to death for fighting against Russian forces in Ukraine. Aidan Islin, 28, and Sean Pinner, 48, were convicted along with a Moroccan man by a court run by Russia-backed rebels in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. The two Britons were members of a Ukrainian military unit and were fighting alongside Ukraine's Azov battalion in the defense of Mariupol when they were captured. Government Minister Robin Walker said it was an illegal court in a sham government and insisted the Foreign, Development and Commonwealth Office, FCDO, would use all diplomatic channels to make the case that these are prisoners of war who should be treated accordingly. Russia needs to take responsibility, its responsibilities under the Geneva Convention, for the treatment of prisoners of war, Walker said. Foreign Secretary Truss meanwhile is due to speak to her Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba later today about the case. It is understood that the call had been scheduled for a number of days to discuss the UK's support of Ukraine, but the sentencing of Islin and Pinner brings a new sense of urgency for the British Foreign Secretary. I utterly condemn the sentencing of Aidan Islin and Sean Pinner held by Russian proxies in eastern Ukraine, Truss said this morning. They are prisoners of war. This is a sham judgment with absolutely no legitimacy. My thoughts are with the families. We continue to do everything we can to support them. Islin's family said in a statement last night, "We've heard the news from Donetsk and need some time to take everything in. We love Aidan with all our hearts. He and Sean, as members of Ukrainian armed forces, should be treated with respect just like any other prisoners of war. They are not, and never were, mercenaries." We hope that this sentence will be overturned and beseech the governments of the UK and Ukraine to do everything in their power to have them return to us safely, and we can only imagine what they are going through right now. This is a very upsetting development and we ask that our privacy is respected at this time. Last night, MP Robert Jenrick said, This disgusting Soviet-era style show trial is the latest reminder of the depravity of Putin's regime. But a Whitehall source warned a strong British reaction could legitimize Russia's claims that Aslin and Pinner were operating as mercenaries rather than paid members of Ukraine's armed forces. There's a solid rationale for not wanting to escalate this and make it a bilateral issue between the UK and Russia, the source said. This is because international law considers them Ukrainian combatants, and Ukraine is responsible for them in legal terms. If the UK gets involved, it will aid Russia's argument that these are mercenaries. The three men said they will appeal the decision. The court in the DPR, one of two self-proclaimed breakaway states in Ukraine's eastern Donbas, is not internationally recognized. Aslin and Pinner yesterday appeared behind a metal cage as the verdict was read out. Ex-British Army soldier Pinner stared at the ground and appeared distraught and close to tears, while former care worker Aslin remained composed. The pair were captured by Russian forces after becoming surrounded in the port city of Mariupol in April. They have since been paraded in various videos with visible injuries and appeared to read from scripts.